The air in the chamber was sharp enough to cut through silence. Cameras blinked red, ready for blood. Ron DeSantis leaned forward, elbows planted, the smirk of a man who thought he'd already won. His words dripped with confidence-measured pauses, that practiced tone meant to box his opponent into submission. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His posture said it all. I'm in control. Across the table, Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't blink. The faintest glimmer crossed her eyes, something between patience and calculation. The kind of look that told a story. She'd seen this performance before. The patronizing smile, the waiting for her to stumble, the silent dare to defend herself. Every head in the room tilted slightly toward her, as if gravity itself had shifted. A hush rippled through the audience, half expectation, half dread. DeSantis leaned in further, pressing his point, a verbal trap disguised as a question. The sound of his voice carried the smug certainty of someone writing their own headline. Then came the pause. Crockett inhaled, slow and steady, her calm louder than his words. And when she finally opened her mouth, no one could have predicted how her next sentence would change the room to understand that. Silence, the kind that comes before a storm you have to rewind. This wasn't an accident or a spontaneous exchange caught on camera. It was the inevitable collision of two very different worlds. Ron DeSantis had built his career on spectacle. The quick jab, the well-timed smirk, the viral soundbite that played better online than it did in person. He'd turned politics into theater, perfecting the role of the confident antagonist who always looked like he had the upper hand. Every press conference, every staged confrontation was a performance for his audience, a brand of dominance disguised as leadership. Jasmine Crockett came from a different school entirely. Her arena wasn't spectacle, it was substance. Years of defending the voiceless had sharpened her precision. Every fact she carried was a blade. Every pause, intentional. While DeSantis rehearsed optics, she studied truth. Her calm wasn't silence. It was strategy. So when their paths crossed, it wasn't just two politicians meeting at a microphone. It was arrogance meeting authenticity. It was privilege colliding with principle. The cameras might have captured a single moment, but beneath it lived decades of tension between those who rule through intimidation and those who rise through integrity. This wasn't just another political sparring match. It was a collision of two Americas. Ron DeSantis didn't start as a caricature. He became one. In the early days, he was calculated a strategist with a soldier's discipline and a lawyer's precision. Every move was measured, every phrase field-tested. He spoke in crisp sentences, designed to impress the press and disarm his rivals. But somewhere along the way, strategy became theater. The man who once studied the game began performing it. He learned quickly that outrage travels faster than ideas. Cameras loved him when he sneered. Supporters cheered when he scolded. His rise wasn't built on persuasion. It was built on provocation. Each press conference turned into a battlefield where facts were props, and the goal wasn't clarity, but dominance. He didn't debate to discover truth. He debated to dominate the frame. Behind the polished podiums and patriotic backdrops, there was an addiction forming, the thrill of control. He mastered the art of interruption, the science of humiliation. He would corner opponents with questions designed not to reveal, but to unravel. Every pause, every grin, choreographed for the clip that would play on loop by nightfall. Yet, for all his mastery of optics, there was something hollow beneath the confidence, a quiet desperation to keep the performance alive. Because without the show, what remained? The substance rarely held. Beneath the bravado, his arguments often thinned under scrutiny. But as long as his opponents flinched, the illusion stayed intact. Over time, that illusion became his armor, and like all armor, it dulled his senses. He began to mistake fear for respect, compliance for conviction. His power wasn't persuasion, it was pressure. And pressure, when unchallenged, begins to believe it's permanent. But arrogance is a fragile empire. It only takes one person who refuses to play the part to make the entire act collapse. That's why. Jasmine Crockett was dangerous not because she shouted louder, but because she didn't need to. She saw through the theater. She didn't fear silence, didn't flinch at confrontation. Her calm was the one thing his performance couldn't overpower. DeSantis built his reputation on control, controlling the narrative, the tone, even the tempo of his exchanges. But control only works when others participate in the illusion. And that day, when he leaned forward with that familiar smirk, he wasn't facing another prop in his production. He was facing someone who'd already read the script hand, refused to recite her lines. He didn't know it yet. But the strength he mistook for command was about to meet its quiet undoing. Theatrics could win the room, but not the truth. And for the first time, Ron DeSantis was about to learn what happens when the lights turn against the performer, ChatGPT said. Before Jasmine Crockett ever walked the marble halls of Congress, she was standing in courtrooms where justice didn't always look like justice. Long before the cameras, there were late nights, cheap coffee, and case files stacked like small fortresses on her desk. She wasn't born into influence. She built her credibility from the ground up, one hard-won case at a time. In Dallas, her reputation grew in neighborhoods most politicians only visited when the news cameras were rolling. She defended the accused, the overlooked, the forgotten people who couldn't afford to lose, but couldn't afford to fight either. Every client taught her the same lesson. Power listens only when it's forced to. That's when her calm began to take shape, not as politeness, but as strategy. When others yelled, Jasmine learned to pause. When others postured, she listened. Her silence wasn't surrender. It was a weapon sharper than anger, the kind forged by every door that closed in her face, every condescending smile from a man who thought he'd already won. She learned early that shouting might echo, but composure cuts deeper. By the time she entered politics, Crockett carried more than a resume. She carried a rhythm. Her speeches weren't just arguments. They were measured storms. In committee hearings, she didn't need to match volume. She controlled air. Her restraint disarmed, her intelligence cornered. Her wit sealed the door behind her opponent. What drove her wasn't ambition, it was memory. Memory of the faces she'd defended, the mothers she'd comforted outside courthouses, the neighborhoods that taught her resilience through necessity. Every insult she ignored became fuel. Every setback, a silent vow. Her rise wasn't polished, it was earned. Each step forward came with the weight of proving herself twice. Once as a woman, again as a black woman in a room that rarely made space for either. But that struggle became her poise. That constant fight became her calm. People mistook that calm for softness. They didn't see the fire she kept disciplined, the intellect sharpened by survival, the unshakable belief that truth doesn't need theatrics to be powerful. So when DeSantis leaned forward with his smirk, he wasn't facing a politician, he was facing a woman who spent her life dismantling power games. The room had that electric stillness right before something breaks. DeSantis shifted in his chair, the glint of performance already in his eyes. He adjusted his mic, smiled thinly, and began his next move, a question dressed as civility. Loaded like a trap, Congresswoman, he started, drawing out the word like a challenge. Since you seem so confident in your moral high ground, perhaps you could explain why your party refuses to take accountability for. He paused for effect, glancing at the press gallery, the practiced rhythm of a man who knew how to bait both his opponent and the camera. It wasn't about dialogue. It was about dominance. He wanted her flustered, defensive, small. Murmurs rippled around the table. Staffers looked down at their notes, pretending not to hold their breath. Every eye turned toward Crockett, but she didn't move. Her hands stayed still. Her gaze didn't break. The silence that followed wasn't passive. It was piercing. Every second she refused to speak stripped his performance of momentum. The smirk on his face began to falter. Just slightly, the first hint that his rhythm was slipping. DeSantis tried again, louder this time. Do you have an answer, Congresswoman? Or is this another case of she blinked once, slowly, deliberately? The air thickened. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights, the shuffle of a single shoe against the floor. Somewhere in that stillness, control shifted almost invisibly from the man who thought he had it. To the woman who simply refused to play, DeSantis leaned forward, his tone sharpening, desperate to regain the upper hand. But Crockett's calm had turned into command. And then, with the calm of a seasoned fighter, she leaned in. What came next froze the entire room. For a moment, it looked as if she might let it slide. The kind of silence that fools the untrained eye into thinking it's surrender. But then Jasmine Crockett spoke softly, deliberately, each word landing with the weight of something unshakable. "Governor," she began, her voice low but clear, "you've built an entire career interrupting people who've earned their right to speak." The room went still. Even the reporters stopped typing. "You mistake confidence for control," she continued. "But if you listened instead of postured, you'd realize leadership isn't intimidation. It's integrity." DeSantis blinked, the smirk faltering just enough to betray the shift. Crockett didn't raise her tone. She didn't need to. "You corner people, thinking power means talking the longest. But that's not strength. That's fear wearing a smile." A ripple of reaction spread through the audience. A staffer looked up from her notes. A camera operator leaned in. "You ask questions you don't want answers to, Governor. You provoke so you can perform. But here's the thing, truth doesn't need a stage. It stands on its own." DeSantis opened his mouth to interject, but the timing had turned against him. Her rhythm was surgical, short pauses, sharp precision. Each sentence cut closer to the truth he avoided. "See, I've faced people who actually had power over my life," she said. "Judges, prosecutors, men who thought their titles made them untouchable. And every time I learned the same thing, they all crumble when the facts arrive." Her eyes never left his. "You can throw insults, Governor. You can twist questions. But the difference between a showman and a leader is that a showman needs an audience. A leader can stand alone." You could almost hear the air shift, that collective intake of breath before the moment becomes memory. Dasan leaned back now, his practiced composure slipping into something raw. The grin didn't return. The silence after her words stretched wide, uncomfortable, like the aftermath of a thunderclap. Crockett's gaze softened, not pity, not triumph, just quiet certainty. "And maybe one day," she added, "you'll realize the loudest person in the room isn't always the one being heard." For the first time since the exchange began, he had no reply. A pen rolled off a table somewhere. Sounds small but startling in the stillness. Someone in the back whispered, "Wow." Cameras zoomed in. Reporters exchanged glances. The energy had shifted completely. Crockett straightened in her chair, her voice finding its final measure. "So no, Governor, I won't answer your question. Because it wasn't meant to find truth. It was meant to find weakness. And you didn't find any here." A pause. A quiet exhale from the crowd. Then she leaned back, hands folded, eyes calm. The moment stretched, the kind of silence that feels like justice. DeSantis stared at her, searching for footing, for a line to recover control. But there was nothing left to grip. His smirk had vanished. His script had failed him, and every person watching knew it. The tension that had filled the chamber dissolved into something else. Respect. Even relief. The showman had met substance, and substance had won without raising its voice. And yet, this wasn't the end. Not even close. Because what happened next, minutes later, outside that room, would take this quiet exchange and turn it into a national reckoning. But the real shock came minutes later when the footage hit the internet. It started with a single clip, 27 seconds long, shaky phone footage captured from the back of the chamber. Within an hour, it was everywhere. A caption appeared on X. Jasmine Crockett just ended Ron DeSantis with one line. 10 minutes later, #Crockett clapback was trending worldwide. The video spread like oxygen meeting fire. Edits popped up on TikTok. Slow motion cuts of her calm gaze set to cinematic music. Someone looped the line. "Leadership isn't intimidation. It's integrity over swelling orchestral soundtracks." Another fan turned it into a meme. DeSantis' smirk dissolving into silence with the caption, "When the Wi-Fi of arrogance disconnects." Cable news ran the clip on repeat. Late-night hosts called it a masterclass in composure. Commentators who once dismissed Crockett as too soft-spoken were suddenly praising her as the calm eye and the Hurricane, the Washington Post headline read. The moment's silence spoke louder than power. But it wasn't just pundits. It was the people. Viewers who'd never seen themselves reflected in power saw her restraint as recognition. A mirror of every time they'd been underestimated and chose grace over chaos. One tweet read, "As a first-generation immigrant, I've been in that moment, the calm before choosing not to let arrogance define you." Crockett spoke for all of us, another said. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard. The internet turned her poise into poetry, her stillness into symbol. Fan art appeared overnight, her seated beneath the words "Integrity Speaks." Reaction videos flooded YouTube, tears, applause, pride. It wasn't just about politics anymore. It was about dignity, reclaiming the mic. Meanwhile, DeSantis' communications team scrambled. Draft statements, spin attempts, controlled leaks, all of it fell flat. Every effort to reframe the exchange only amplified the original clip. The more they talked, the smaller he looked, because the narrative was already sealed. In a world addicted to noise, the quiet had won. By dawn, Crockett's words had reached millions. She'd trended longer than the last presidential debate. Editorials called her response a turning point in political tone. Even those who didn't follow politics knew her face. Her voice, her calm, and while she went about her day, attending meetings, greeting constituents, never mentioning the viral storm, her silence continued to echo louder than any press release could. But beyond the headlines and hashtags, something deeper shifted that night. When the noise finally faded, the hashtags, the late-night jokes, the endless reaction threads, what remained was something quieter and far more lasting. Jasmine Crockett's reply had transcended politics. It wasn't about who won a debate. It was about what it means to lead without losing yourself in the performance. Ron. DeSantis came armed with soundbites and swagger, the tools of a generation of politicians who mistake intimidation for influence. But Crockett's weapon was different. Her restraint, in a room wired for chaos, she chose clarity. Where others reached for applause lines, she reached for truth. Her power didn't come from volume. It came from composure. Every pause, every measured breath reminded viewers that dignity is not weakness, it's control refined into grace. She didn't humiliate him. She revealed him. And in doing so, she redefined what strength looks like in public life. The confrontation became more than a viral clip. It became a mirror. For every person who's been interrupted, underestimated, or dismissed, it showed that calm can be louder than arrogance. That holding your ground with integrity is sometimes the most radical act of defiance. DeSantis tried to dominate the frame. Crockett reframed the moment. And maybe that's the deeper moral. In an era obsessed with optics, authenticity is rebellion. In a culture addicted to shouting matches, composure is courage. Leadership isn't the loudest voice in the room. It's the one that can stay centered when provoked, that can answer manipulation with meaning, and pride with principle. Jasmine Crockett didn't just silence a political opponent. She reminded the country that power built on performance collapses under truth. In an age obsessed with volume, silence can be revolutionary. Because when truth stands its ground, even arrogance must listen. It began with a smirk and a trap, ended with silence so powerful it spoke louder than any shout could. The moment Jasmine Crockett met arrogance with calm became more than a debate clip. It became a reflection of who we are and who we want leading us. That single exchange, her steady gaze, her poised delivery, her refusal to be baited, rippled far beyond that room. It reminded the nation that leadership isn't about overpowering others, but standing unshaken when tested. In times like these, composure isn't weakness, it's strategy. And Jasmine Crockett just reminded America what that looks like. Strength wrapped in stillness, truth delivered without fear. The room may have fallen silent, but the echo hasn't stopped. It lives in every person who watched and thought. That's how you fight back without losing yourself. If you believe calm beats chaos, share this story, because dignity deserves a louder echo.